Scott Calvin.
How come your clothes are so baggy?
Because Santa is watching his saturated fats.
How come you don't have a beard?
Because I shaved. Do you want this doll or not? Go back to sleep.
You're supposed to drink the milk.
Look, I am lactose intolerant, and I am just about this close to taking all those presents back up the chimney with me. Supposed to drink that milk. Shut your eyes. No!
All right, everyone. Welcome to Brandon at Random Reviews. I am your host, Brandon Griffiths. Thank you for stopping by. I do appreciate it. If you like listening to a guy talk about one unsystematically chosen movie at a time on a weekly basis, then look no further. To keep up with the newest content, you can find Brandon at Random Reviews on most major video and audio platforms, as well as all popular social media sites. If you enjoy this, please like and subscribe or follow, whatever it is you gotta do. Today's movie is covering The Santa Claus, released on November 11th, 1994, directed by John Pasquin, written by Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick, produced by Brian Riley, Jeffrey Silver, and Robert Newmeyer. For the score, we have composer Michael Convertino, and actually, I really like the score of this movie. I probably won't mention that enough, but it's got like a really cool sound to it. For the cast, we have Tim Allen, who plays Scott Calvin / spoiler alert, Santa Claus. He was in the movie Galaxy Quest, which was a spoof of the sci-fi genre, specifically Star Trek, if I remember right. And he was also in the Toy Story movies as Buzz Lightyear, and those movies are fucking like, I love at least the first couple. I really grew up on those ones, and I found them really enjoyable. And of course, he was also on the hit sitcom Home Improvement. Eric Lloyd plays Charlie Calvin. Wendy Crewson plays Laura Miller. Judge Reinhold plays Neil Miller, and he was in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which was a teen movie from the 80s. If I'm not mistaken, it was kind of a groundbreaking movie at the time. It had a lot of talk of sex, drugs, things like that. Sean Penn was in it. And he was also in the Beverly Hills Cop trilogy. And I keep hearing that they're supposed to remake the Beverly Hills Cop movies. Now, I like that trilogy of movies, but they are steadily worse as you go. I mean, second and third, they get progressively worse. David Krumholtz is the last person I have, and he plays Bernard the Elf. For casting notes, Bill Murray and Chevy Chase were offered the role of Scott Calvin, but turned it down. Tom Selleck, Robin Williams, Tom Hanks, John Ritter, Kurt Russell, John Travolta, Rowan Atkinson, Mike Myers, Michael Keaton, Harrison Ford, Patrick Swayze, and Mel Gibson were all also considered for the role of Scott Calvin. And again, I've said this before, I don't know what IMDb means when they say they were considered for the role. Like, they were just like in the conversation. What's that about? Jeff Daniels, Stanley Tucci, and Bradley Whitford were considered for the role of Neil. Patricia Richardson, who played Jill on Home Improvement, so she was Tim Allen's wife, and Patricia Clarkson, Patricia Heaton, and Kate Burton were considered for the role of Laura, and I guess they were really lobbying hard to get a Patricia to be in this movie, and I guess they failed. For the plot synopsis, a divorced father unwittingly agrees to become the new Father Christmas when the old one falls off his roof one fateful night. For the tagline, this Christmas, the snow hits the fan. I don't like it at all. All right, guys, let's just dive right into the plot of this fucking movie. So as we kick off this movie, we see an office Christmas party taking place, and we get introduced to our protagonist, Scott Calvin, who works at a toy company, and they waste no time establishing that Scott is this unlikable knob who makes a lot of snide comments that he really thinks are funny. Scott is heading home afterward, making excuses to his ex-wife Laura Laura on his cell phone about being late to meet her and her husband, Neil, who are dropping off Charlie, who is Scott and Laura's 8-year-old son, so that he can stay at his dad's for Christmas Eve night. There's discussion between Scott and Laura when he arrives about comments that Neil made to Charlie, where he suggested that Santa Claus kind of sort of doesn't exist in a physical sense. And Scott already doesn't like Neil, nor does he like that Neil said this to his 8-year-old son, and he wasn't even like consulted or brought into the discussion or anything. And so it just kind of irks him. We learn that Charlie is not particularly fond of his father or spending time with him, obviously. At the very least, he prefers being with his mother. I won't get into any major Charlie character discussion until a little later, but trust me, I will be discussing Charlie as a character. So Scott burns Christmas dinner, so they're forced to go to the only establishment that is actually open on this day, which is Denny's. Now, say what you will about Denny's, but I truly believe the only way you can choose to eat there is by way of total desperation brought on by a lack of options. It's made pretty clear that Charlie's displeasure with visiting his dad has really been solidified after the major disappointments of the night. That night, Scott reads Charlie The Night Before Christmas, and Charlie is still questioning all of the Christmas mythology as a result of the seeds of doubt planted by Neil. After going to bed, Charlie hears a loud thud on the roof and wakes Scott to go investigate. This part I never understand. This fucking Santa cannot possibly be this loud and not recognize that people are going to hear him. Like, you would think that he's like falling flat on his ass on this roof. It's not that easy to hear things on a roof. Like, if you're just walking around it in a big house, like not so much, but it's like fucking absurd to me. I actually would love it if they really went all in on the premise of this movie and you found out that the Santa was so bad because he had only recently taken over the role himself, and he was actually one of several Santa successors that had taken over after similar accidents had happened multiple times throughout this one Christmas night. But in the actual movie, Scott startles Santa enough to make him fall off the roof and land on the ground, and Scott discovers a business card of sorts in his pocket, instructing anyone who finds him to just put on the suit and let the reindeer help with whatever else happens, because of course there's a sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer on Scott's roof. When Santa's lifeless body lays there and Scott and Charlie debate about what they should do, the body just kind of disappears. I don't really know what the established lore is surrounding this vanishing Santa. Like, is that guy dead? Does he go back to his old life? Who cares? So they decide to get in the sleigh, and it takes off, and eventually they arrive at a house, and Charlie convinces Scott to put on the suit and delivers toys to the house. All right, I held out as long as I could, but I've got to discuss this. Charlie is such a fucking whine ass. Like, I know he's 8 years old, but like every other thing he says, he's pissing and moaning about something. Like, Charlie wants Scott to do the Santa thing, but at one point, Scott just says that it's objectively stupid, and Charlie's just like, how come everything I want to do is stupid? Like, shut the fuck up, man. That's because that's how it is. If you say nothing but stupid shit, then that's pretty much what's going to happen. It's going to feel like everything you have to say is stupid. So Scott caves to the obvious guilt trip from his son and puts on the suit and goes down the chimney with the toys. And there's some supernatural stuff going on. Like, the bag makes Scott fly and hover, and the chimney warps and transforms in a supernatural way to allow him clearance to actually go down because it's clearly too small. They deliver to the rest of the houses on the route, and he runs into random people, gets chased by dogs in one, as well as one where the roof vent and radiator magically turn into a chimney and fireplace, and a little girl is sleeping on the couch and wakes up and is more shocked by this skinny Santa Claus than she is by the fact that half of her living room has just transformed like this. And also, like, looking at Tim Allen, you're not thinking, oh, well, this is definitely Santa Claus. I mean, he's wearing a red suit. Like, you're going to just think this is some fucking dude in your house. They get to the North Pole and they meet the elves, and Scott is informed that he's the new Santa, and he says that's fucking bullshit. The head elf, Bernard, explains that due to a supposed contract printed microscopically small, like they have to use a magnifying glass to see it, on the Santa business card that says by putting on the suit, you agree to become Santa, hence a contract quote unquote clause known as the Santa Claus. Okay. Charlie is, of course, amazed by this North Pole experience, and Scott just wants to get the fuck out of there and can't believe what's happening, but they end up staying the night. The next morning, they wake up back at Scott's house, and before long, Laura is knocking on the door ready to pick up Charlie, and Scott wants to believe that the Santa stuff was just a dream he had, but Charlie remembers it all too. It's like, basically, he even tries to rationalize that Charlie knows that he's like telling Laura about it, and he says that he must have told Charlie all about this dream. Otherwise, it makes no sense, like it had to have actually happened. Essentially, Scott just writes it off anyway and just carries on with his life, but Charlie is still very much hung up on it to the point that it's kind of a concern for Laura and Neil, and the two of them assume that Scott wound Charlie up about the whole thing to make Charlie like Scott more. Charlie makes an issue about it at school, and the parents all have to sit down with the principal, and they decide that Scott needs to tell Charlie that he's not Santa, but when Scott goes to do that, Charlie's like absolutely not having it. They have to keep trying to reason with him, but the boy cannot be convinced otherwise, and ultimately they suggest that maybe Scott spending time with Charlie is not such a good idea anymore. Scott has a heart-to-heart with the child about keeping the whole thing a secret because he can't get him to say it didn't happen, but he can at least convince him not to be talking about it with everybody. Next thing we know, Scott is getting out of bed one morning and he's gained a ton of weight and his facial hair has grown a lot more than usual overnight. Scott comes into work and his coworkers are alarmed by his change in appearance. Scott blames his weight on an allergic reaction to a bee sting, despite ordering a ton of really decadent food for lunch, and everybody's kind of like looking at him like, yeah, right, Scott, that was a fucking bee sting. Sounds like you're just fucking, chowing down on shit. At Scott's work meeting, the team is revealing a new Santa toy featuring a tank in lieu of a sleigh, and Scott gets very fired up about the whole thing. He doesn't like it. He says Santa has to have his sleigh, and I assume that ordinarily this would not be Scott's take on the whole situation. He probably wouldn't think that, but because of his recent experiences, he thinks this. By the way, I saw a tweet about this one time about how crazy it is that in movies like this, there are parents that don't believe in Santa, but presents they didn't buy just appear under the tree on Christmas morning, and they don't find it a wee bit strange. Scott goes to the doctor, and basically neither of them can make sense of all the sudden changes to Scott's physical appearance. It gets to the point where his facial hair grows faster than he can keep it shaved, and suddenly kids start to believe he really is Santa. Like, he is sitting on a bench at Charlie's soccer game, and these kids like line up to talk to him and ask for things for Christmas. Laura and Neil have to confront him because at this point he looks quite a bit like Santa Claus. Like, he's much bigger and he's got light-haired beard. Like, it's gray, it's not fully white yet, but he definitely is evoking the Santa Claus look. And Laura and Neil are upset with Scott for taking things to such an unhealthy level to win Charlie's affection. They officially begin the process of revoking Scott's custody or visitation rights. Laura and Neil go with Charlie to start this process of keeping Scott out of Charlie's life. And while they wait, Laura talks about how she stopped believing in Santa when she didn't get this mystery date game she really wanted when she was a kid. Neil says that he was very young when it happened, and it was when he didn't get an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle. I guess this movie is saying that people stopped believing in Santa because they didn't receive specific gifts from Santa, and that was what did it. Like, they get other gifts from Santa the same year, seemingly, but they're just not getting this one particular gift, and it was like the one they really wanted. And so that makes them stop believing, despite seemingly having evidence that that doesn't make sense. Scott makes an unplanned visit so he can say goodbye to Charlie, and let me just say, young Charlie is at maximum insufferability here. And of course, you do have to consider the fact that he's a little kid. He probably doesn't really understand what's going on, and he's also frustrated because he knows that nobody believes him and he knows that all of this stuff really happened, but everybody's like upset with Scott about the fact that this is like coming true. So naturally, after Laura and Neil give them a little bit of privacy before they part ways, Bernard the elf shows up and he and Scott abduct Charlie and take him to the North Pole. Scott is presented with several new concept technologies like a special sleigh, a fireproof suit, stuff like that. Police are now searching the neighborhoods to find a man who looks like Santa Claus, which of course lends itself to comedy bits where they're mistaking regular people dressed up as Santa Claus for Scott. But of course, they're looking for a man who, for all intents and purposes, kidnapped this child. So it's like they're kind of like chuckling about it, but it's also like you have to be under the impression that this guy's a lunatic if you're one of these fucking police officers. Like, I would think, even though it has funny connotations, like they probably wouldn't be, laughing it up. They take off to deliver toys, and Charlie shows Scott the new sleigh features, which includes a CD. And Scott assumes this is a compact disc player, and Charlie corrects him and says, no, it's a cookie cocoa dispenser. But like, why? Like, it spits out a cookie that apparently it just made, and it makes hot cocoa. But it's like, aren't you getting milk and cookies from every other house, Scott? What if you just maybe pace yourself a little bit? Do you fucking need that much more cookies? Like, fuck. Okay, there's a word I've noticed that a lot of people pronounce wrong, and it genuinely irritates the fuck out of me. Charlie, instead of saying couldn't, he pronounces it as couldn't. Like, just replacing the D with another N or something. Like, go fuck yourself. I don't care if you're 8 years old. You need to pay attention in school more because that's not how you pronounce couldn't. Naturally, the cops are trying to track Scott down, and they ambush him at Laura and Neil's while he's dropping presents off and take him into headquarters. But first, there's an emotional scene where kids are upset at what's happening to Santa, and Charlie is stranded on the roof, and this is hilarious to me. Somebody says, while the police are running out, that Charlie, the boy that they are looking for, is on the roof, and apparently nobody goes up there to get him, and he just sits there. Nobody does anything about it. The elves dispatch a squad known as ELFS, which stands for Effective Liberating Fight Squad, and they have jetpacks. Also, that acronym is pretty fucking forced if you ask me. The police interrogate Scott, who refuses to admit to any non-Santa Claus identity. Charlie and the elves go to the police headquarters to break out Santa, and I fucking hate this sequence. Like, it's such a family kids comedy movie thing where it's like they're tying up the guards and they're doing all this stuff that they shouldn't be, and they're breaking Scott out, and it's just really cheesy. Now that he's out of jail, Santa takes Charlie back to Laura and Neil's house and has to tearfully tell Charlie that he's going to have to stay with Laura and Neil. Laura has a revelation and finally admits that he really is Santa Claus, and Neil also begrudgingly acknowledges this as well, and then Laura burns the custody agreement, but I feel like a lot of people would have copies of those, and there'd probably be a lot of legal stuff with it. Like, I don't think just burning it means that much, but I guess it's kind of like symbolic that she's like saying that she's okay with Scott now. Bernard comes and informs Charlie that the snow globe he gave him at the beginning of the movie can be shaken to call for his father to come back at any time. The police come just as Santa is leaving, and by the way, there have been a lot of rough reindeer visual effects that are either bad green screens or primitive CGI. Bottom line is, it's trash. Santa drops gifts down to Laura and Neil. One is a mystery date game for Laura and an Oscar Mayer weenie whistle for Neil, and their faith is restored. And Charlie stands outside shaking the globe later on, and Santa finally comes, and Laura agrees to let them go for a quick ride together. And they kind of make like a bit out of it where she's like, a quick one, not over any oceans. It's something, I guess, but eventually we roll credits. So praise for this movie. It's a nice little story, albeit completely ridiculous, but that comes with the territory, both family movies and Christmas movies. It puts a cool spin on Santa Claus lore, giving new explanations to multiple elements behind the ways he does things. Honestly, I have to begrudgingly admit that this movie is also very heartfelt at times and even gets fairly emotional here and there. Okay, so criticism for this movie, Charlie, both because of the character and I guess the child actor who plays him, is insufferable and just seems to whine almost all the time. So a lot of the comedy has not aged well for me. It seems like a lot of the Tim Allen humor just isn't particularly great anymore. Like, I remember liking Home Improvement, but I've never wanted to go back and revisit. And last but not least, as I just mentioned, this is an unfortunate instance of a movie using visual effects that had not quite improved enough to look good at the time that the movie was made, and it just kind of sucks. Like, it just looks bad. Okay, so trivia. For 1 week in November of 1994, Tim Allen had the #1 movie at the box office, the #1 rated television show in Home Improvement, and the #1 New York Times best-selling book, Don't Stand Too Close to a Naked Man. I have no idea what that is. Tim Allen has a criminal record, if you didn't know, and Disney has a strict no hiring of ex-cons policy. An exception was, of course, made in this case. Tim Allen underwent 4 to 5 hours of makeup and prosthetic applications to transform into Santa, not including the 2 hours it took to take it off, and had to wear multiple fat suits during filming, which took place in the middle of summer. Because of the latex, Allen experienced heat rashes, scars, scratches, and infections, and there was a time limit on how long he could be in the suit while filming, maxing out at 6 hours because of the poor ventilation. Tim Allen said, "They got better and better at air conditioning me and just keeping me calm." That was what he told ABC News of the later films. If you didn't know, there are multiple sequels to this movie. I've seen 2 and 3, and I think maybe there's a TV show or another new movie. I don't know, but they're all terrible. I mean, like, the second one sucks, and the third one's even worse, and it's just not worth your time. Okay, so on to info and ratings. We have a runtime of 97 minutes. This movie is rated PG by the Motion Picture Association of America. Budget, $22 million. Opening weekend, $19.3 million. Worldwide gross, $190.5 million. IMDb rating, 6.5. Letterboxd rating, 3.1. Rotten Tomato critic score, 73%. Rotten Tomato audience score, 65%. Personal rating, 4 out of 5 stars. I know I didn't have much good to say about this one, but all the same, it's from my childhood, and I still really enjoy it, and I watch it almost every year, so I don't know. I mean, say what you will about it, it's just, it is what it is. I'm kind of like, it's tough, because I know that if I saw this movie for the first time today, I wouldn't feel as strongly about it, but what can you do? Okay, so, all right, everybody. Well, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. And like I said, subscribe, like, all that stuff. And I'm just going to keep on chugging along as long as I can. All right, everyone. Have a good rest of your day. Bye now.
You're fatter this year.
Well, thank you very much. You've grown too. You're a very good girl this year. But I want you to go back to sleep, okay? Ooh. I think the milk's a little sour.
It's soy milk.
Huh?
You said you're lactose intolerant.
I did say that.